This is Religion and Theology, a podcast from the Center for Theology and Religious Studies. Today's episode is the last snapshot from the Åsö Vlander commemorative Multireligious Identities conference held in March of 2022 at CTR. And this time we will listen to Volker Küster, who is not only an honorary doctor at CTR, but also professor of Comparative Religion and Missiology at the Johannes-Gutenberg-Universität in Mainz, Germany. And I will now hand over the word to Mika Vähäkangas, who will allude to the fact that Professor Küster will also give a lecture in relation to his becoming honorary doctor at CTR. And now I will give the word to Mika Vähäkangas, who will allude to the fact that Professor Küster will also give a lecture in May of 2022 in relation to becoming honorary doctor at CTR. And this will be published as a separate episode.
So, I would like to introduce to you Professor Volker Küster from Mainz. He's a very well-known figure in Lund because actually he belongs to our faculty as an honorary doctor. This kind of a COVID honorary doctor, and we will be celebrating him in May, actually. But anyways, he's already officially that. So, Volker, welcome to your second home.
Thank you. Well, first of all, of course, I would like to thank the organizers for all the work you put into this. We have been busy with this, writing emails forth and back for 2 years now, so I'm quite happy to be here. Many faces in the audience are very familiar to me from former conferences that also have organized in Lund. Also would have actually been very happy to be here at this conference. It's much of his spirit is around, I feel. And yesterday the students shared their experience with him as a supervisor. I, as a colleague, can say it was just the same, you know. He was listening to you asking and saying, yoho, yoho. And, you know, sometimes I thought he has some spirit of a trickster or tokebi, as the Koreans say. But then the next moment he comes around the corner with very sharp questions, always encouraging. So he was a great friend, and I'm happy to be here to honor him. When I was following the papers during the last 2 days, I felt a lot of similarities on what we are busy with, and I also want to share a lot of pictures with you, but I also want to put up some theoretical questions on this whole language game and terminologies. Not much is happening here with my... Let's see.
Okay. Oh, yeah, it does.
Okay. So what you see here is an impression from an art exhibition I had the pleasure to organize in Yogyakarta during a conference on Muslim-Christian dialogue. And we brought together 3 Muslim and 3 Christian artists. And at the opening of this exhibition, we also had a talk show, and 4 of the 6 artists, 2 Christian, 2 Muslim, were present. And we have been talking several times about spirituality already here, and the artists all said, well, you know, we may be Muslim, we may be Christian, but we meet in the space of spirituality. And one of the artists present he was not present in the talk show, but his paintings were present, is Hendato. He is a Catholic, but a convert from Islam, and he's living in the Kraton area, so he is living close to the Sultan's palace, still as a Catholic Christian, and he's very much involved in this Japanese mysticism, so that's the space where Christianity and Islam meet in Yogyakarta. And this painting is a John and Jesus, the baptism of Jesus. And the interesting thing in this picture is that the bird is not coming down, as you would expect, the spirit coming down, but the bird is flying up. And I think that has to do with his Muslim background. This idea that Jesus is the Son of God is still something he's struggling with. So what you have here is a kind of elevation of Jesus, actually, like you had the discussion in the ancient church under the term of adoptionism. And again, in this painting, the risen Christ, you can see this bubble above his head. Yeah? So it's not just an easy way up. So he's still struggling with this idea that Jesus has been risen from the dead. And finally, his reflection on the risen Christ. You can see that the eyes of Jesus are going to his feet with the marks of the cross. So again, the artist is reflecting what does it mean that in Christ you have God and human being, and that Christ has risen. Yeah, so you can see that he's struggling with his new faith from this background of his Muslim upbringing, because in the Quran, as you know, Jesus is venerated as one of the prophets, but he's not the Son of God. A Muslim artist present in the exhibition was K.G. Habib, and he brought this painting series of the prophets. And the last image is Muhammad as a prophet. And this is, again, this Javanese mysticism that you can see in this painting, this heart here, the center of the face, and you have a visual portrait of Muhammad, which is, of course, very controversial. And I wrote a book on Christian art in Indonesia under the title Between Pancasila and Fundamentalism. So these artists who were in the exhibition all told me that they have been under pressure from fundamentalist movements regarding their artworks. So these were four of the artists who were present. On the right, Newman Dasane, who we will turn to now. Next to him, Keji Habib. And on the left side, Vishnu Sasonko. He has also Muslim background, but became Christian. And Bakhtiar Assam, who is also a Muslim artist. Newman Dasane is from the island of Bali. So Indonesia is majority Muslim, but Bali is an exception and Hindu island, the only place where Hinduism is a majority religion outside of India. And he converted to Christianity, but tries to give his Christian faith a Balinese image. And when we organized an exhibition for him in the early 90s, we called it The Beautiful Gospel. And what you see here is an early painting from the 70s. He made the 10 virgins, and you can see that the virgins are dancing and going up to the light. And some have the lights, the candles, others have not, but they are not really separated. And the idea behind this is that in the Balinese context, the central principle is harmony. So you have to have harmony between good and evil, and this is expressed for him in the story of the 10 virgins, but also in the story of Mary and Martha. So complementarity, harmony is a very important for his art, and that's why we choose that title, The Beautiful Gospel. You can ask yourself, who is Mary, who is Martha in this painting? Yeah? Because he said we need both. Yeah? We need Mary and we need Martha. This is another one of his 10 Virgins painting that has been hanging a long time in my study. And of course, he's also venerating the beautiful woman of Bali in his paintings. Yeah? And here you have a market scene, as you can see it when you drive through the island. And the light is coming from within this group of women. They all are focused on this light. You see the market stands, and his idea is that God is already present in Bali. His light, her light is already shining. This is one of my favorite pictures of him, an early batik. And if you wouldn't know, you probably wouldn't identify this as an image of Jesus. It's the creation of sun and moon. So you see he already has thrown the ball of the sun into the sky, and if you look to the other hand, you can see the crescent of the moon. So next moment he will throw the ball of the moon also into the sky. So he took this from the iconography of the dancing Shiva, but while Shiva is not only the creator, but also the preserver and the destroyer in this image of the Shiva Nataraja, he only took this idea of the dance as creation. And you find that in the Christian tradition, in the Orthodox tradition, and in the Jewish Christian idea of wisdom, that Jesus is playing, the wisdom is playing in front of God. So I find this a very good translation of the idea of Trinity and Christology into the Balinese context. The dance is a prayer in front of God, and at the same time God is present in the dance, and here Christ is present already in creation. And they dance toward Christ, and usually Shiva is sending them out to fight. But if you look at the second picture, you will see that Christ is turning the spears against his own chest. Yeah, so he is transforming this war dance into a Christological message about the crucified Christ, and you can see here the beams of the cross behind the dancer. This is a sermon, not on the field or the mount, but the sermon on the beach. So Christ came to Bali on the beach, and people are dancing towards him. And now, all of a sudden, in 2004, with the tsunami, and the Balinese bombings, you may remember that there have been some Muslim extremists who threw bombs into the tourist discotheques, and people died. This world of the beautiful gospel, the harmony was disturbed, and he was painting this, which I would interpret as a Gethsemane picture, Christ contemplating on why do these children have to suffer, that you see in the front. And if you look at their hands, you can see they already have these dancing gestures. So the next moment they will probably get up and express their suffering in dance. In the background, you can still see shadows of these ships that we see in the other painting. But the world of Bali, the harmony has been disturbed, and that also can be seen in the change of colors in his works. And interestingly, he has painted this painting 5 minutes before the fall, very early in the 70s. Now, if you read this picture in the line of the tsunami, we are told that the animals ran to the inside of the country, and the tourists went to take pictures of the tsunami. So the tourists died and the animals survived. And if you look here, then you can see the animals are running away because they feel this trembling of the upcoming fall. So there was something of this knowledge already in his artworks. he not only referred to the iconography of Shiva, but also of Krishna, and he painted this picture, which is called Krishna Christ. He depicts Krishna as a shadow puppet, as you can see, but if you look closely, you will see that the face has several shadows. And Dasein is asking, cannot be one of these shadows be the shadow of Christ? Yeah, so again, he is bringing this Christian ideas into the context of Hindu iconography, and as you know, Krishna is actually an avatar, an incarnation of Vishnu. So that's the bridge that he is taking here. And in front, you can see Mary and Martha dancing towards Jesus, and again you can ask who is Mary and who is Martha. This is also on this face after the tsunami and the 2002 bombings. And again, you can see Christ dancing on the cross, but it's much more expressive now, crucifixion scene. It's called the Rain of Blood, so you can see the blood dripping down the painting, and there are shadows of evil figures left and right, shadow puppets that are the demons in the shadow puppet place. Dasein is in dialogue with Hindu artists. He's not only a painter, he's also a dancer, and he gets the masks from a mask carver, Newman Seppet. And I visited him several times together with Dasein. And Dasein said in the beginning, well, I tried to ask him to create certain masks for me, but that was not such a success because they didn't have the spirit. So he decided he goes there and picks whatever masks he feels has the spirit, and then asks him to make little changes so that he can use these masks for his Christian dance choreographies. And Seppet himself is, of course, for a living. His wife is selling some of the masks in the market, but then he always hides those masks from her where he thinks they have the spirit, because he wants to give them to a village community who is using these masks then really for religious purposes. And this was one of his favorite works, so he kept it in his house, and he didn't finish it, so that his wife cannot bring it to the market, because once it is painted, then she would sell it, because he said this is a piece that has a spirit, and it was a period of over 4 years that I convinced him to sell it to me. So it's now we have the spirit in a sense in our living room. Again, spirituality here is a dialogue bridge. If you see how they talk about which mask has the spirit and which mask doesn't. I also went to him, to an artist who's painting in the Kamasan style. That's the earliest painting style in Bali. If you look at it, then it's the transformation of shadow puppet to painting. Yeah, so the white background is still the veil behind which the shadow puppets are played, and here you have a depiction of the dancing Shiva again. But again, of course, this is a unity, as Panika would put it, of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And then, of course, for a living, he sells these works that are done by his students, and you can clearly see, even with this little reproduction, the difference in quality between the style that he is using and that his pupils, that's much more less sophisticated. This is in the village of Kamasan. It's a hall in which the local king would function as a judge, and these are the oldest oldest paintings of the Kamasan style in the roof of this hall, but unfortunately they are painted on asbest panels, so actually they are what we call in German Sondermüll. Yeah? So it's a very dangerous material, of course. Sibylle has already talked about Uttarananda, and luckily enough, Sibylle, I also have this painting that you have been discussing in color, so people can see it now in color as well. But I start with one of his earliest Christian themes, the washing of the feet. That was a commissioned work by Aloysius Pierres. That has been quoted already yesterday by Mika, a Jesuit priest and liberation theologian, who is running a dialogue center in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And he came into dialogue with Uttarananda and asked him to make this painting for his dialogue center. And you see Christ and the disciples are wearing the robes of the monks. And actually the host, the head of the family, would be supposed to greet the monks. Yeah? But here it is Jesus who is washing the feet of his disciples. So even a Buddhist who is looking at this will see there's something going on here that is not according to the ways of doing. And in the background you can see the woman of the house, and behind her a servant with darker skin. And the interesting thing is, in Sri Lanka and Buddhism, the caste system has prevailed. So it's not as oppressive probably as it is in India, but still Sri Lankan Buddhism still has the caste system. So this is a hint to a woman of lower caste status probably. And what is Uttarananda is doing, he's trying to bring into dialogue the figure of Jesus and the Buddha, and he's especially interested about this question of purity, impurity. So the Zamatarian woman, Jesus, is stepping across this border of impurity, which is very important in the caste system. Yes, that, and the Buddha did the same thing. With the street cleaner, you can see he is touching him here, and his disciples came towards Sunyata, the street cleaner, off. But the Buddha said, no, everybody can reach Nirvana. Mm-hmm. So he sees here both the Buddha and the Jesus crossing these borders towards the untouchables. Again, here Jesus in the dress of a Buddhist monk, turning to the poor, the women, the oppressed. And this is a very interesting painting indeed, because here you see a Buddhist monk, and as you know, in the Theravada tradition, the Buddhist monks go and ask for food. And it's not the monk who is saying thank you for getting the food, but it's the person who's giving the monk who's saying the food to the monk who's saying thank you actually, because he or she can do something for her good karma. But here, a poor beggar woman is asking the monk for food. Yeah, so Uttarananda is a representative of the social engaged Buddhism. He is in dialogue with these liberation theologians like Pierres. So he is focusing on these social issues. Here you have the temptation of Jesus, and here you have Judas. And interestingly, Judas has become a very important figure in some of his paintings, and I think that is also a figure that he identifies with as a Buddhist artist, because he is doubting in a way this idea, of course, that Jesus is the Son of God and that he is risen from the dead. Yeah, here you have the carrying the cross, and Mary and the beloved disciple, and the snake on the cross that Sibylla also already referred to in this nativity scene. So he is very aware of this idea that the life of Jesus has been endangered from the beginning, and he is in a way able to relate this to this idea of suffering and passion in Christianity. The next artist I want to turn to is Solomon Raj, a Lutheran priest and theologian. Also certainly knew him because he did his PhD in Birmingham as well, and visited there several times later on. And this is a very special painting I start with by Nandalal Bose. He is a Hindu artist from the so-called Hindu Renaissance, but he is painting the carrying of the cross. And the interesting thing is that Tagore, one of the representatives of this Shanitekan ashram, said the three big iconographic inventions are the dance of the Shiva, the smile of the Buddha, and the Passion of Christ. Yeah, while Hinduism it is not very familiar with this idea of a God who is suffering, all of a sudden in the Hindu Renaissance there was appreciation for this theology of the cross. So in the 60s, one in his early prints, Solomon Raj referred to this picture of the Hindu Renaissance. But for the rest, you can hardly find any reference to Hindu iconography in his work. And when I was thinking about this, and then in the 80s, we got familiar with Dalit theology. One evening over dinner, I asked him, Solomon, are you Dalit? And then he was a bit hesitant. I said, oh, well, I live in the city. There's a caste system that doesn't matter, and so on and so forth. But that taught me to interpret his artwork in a quite different way, because he was also using Ethiopian icons. He has been working for Radio Voice of the Gospel in Ethiopia for some time. So I came to the conclusion that he is consciously rejecting using Hindu iconography because of the discrimination of the Dalits. So here you can see the flight into Egypt, but actually these are the refugees that you had within India, and his lino cuts are very expressive, while when he's doing the same in batik, it becomes more soft, but still it has a clear social message. And here you have Christ holding his arm around the Dalit family. So actually Christ is present here twice. So that's the Christ who is holding the arm around the family. But on the other hand, it's also an image of the Holy Family, of course. So Christ is present in the suffering of the Dalits. And now you have this lino cut by him. It's called Jesus the Teacher, and obviously here he is referring to Buddhist iconography. But at the same time, if you look at the gesture of his hands, there's also some influence of Orthodox iconography. And here you have Jesus as a Buddha on the lotus. But finally, I also found one batik of him where he is really portraying the Buddha. And here you have the rising Christ with the lotus flower. And so why he is using Buddhist iconography? Ambedkar, the great antipode of Gandhi in the struggle for liberation. He was a lawyer and he was a Dalit activist. And he said, I was born as a Hindu, I cannot do anything about that, but I don't have to die as a Hindu. So he converted with 500,000 of his followers to Buddhism right before his death. So I think what Solomon Raj is doing here is also an implicit dialogue with Ambedkar and his decision as a Dalit to convert to Buddhism. And as you can see here, there's a lot of this popular art that is still paying a lot of tribute to Ambedkar. The left one is actually the cover of a punk band, Dalit punk band, and the right one shows Ambedkar and the Buddha in one painting. So now I come to a few theoretical remarks. These pictures I've shown you from different artists who are on the borders between two different religions. If it comes to artistic representation in the global south, still the two most seen pictures are cheap reproductions of Da Vinci's Holy Supper and Dürer's Praying Hands. To prove that, I went to an island in Papua close to the city of Jayapura, and you see here a local artist, and on his door he has this reproduction of the Holy Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. So this would be mere transplantation. Then the second model of how this works, the contact between different cultures and religion, is assimilation. And an early example is this stone carving of the Nestorian stele, where you see the Nestorian cross on the lotus flower, and left and right you have Taoist clouds, and then lilies, as they are very familiar in Christian iconography. Now, having a post-colonial background, of course, you become suspicious and say, oh, again, this is a symbol of Christian colonialism, planting the cross on the lotus. But if you look into the tradition of Hindu and Buddhist iconography, it's the lotus that always elevates the Buddha and the Hindu gods. So I would argue here the Christian cross is elevated by the lotus. Then we come to this phase of accommodation. That means you try to separate between form and content, but still you try to give Christian faith a local look. And you have here the Madonna as a Chinese woman, but baby Jesus is still very much the little Baroque child from the Western model. And an interesting detail is that Mary is barefoot. That would never be shown on a photo of, on a depiction of a Chinese woman, because that's a bit loose. So probably the artist here was a Western artist among the Jesuits who was trained in Chinese painting, and he didn't know about this cultural code. This is one of my favorite neo-accommodation pictures from Japan from the 1930s. It's a silk painting by Luke Hasegawa, and it shows the Annunciation. And you can see the angel is a woman dressed in a beautiful white kimono with the lily, as we have seen in the Nestorian stele. And it's spring, the cherry blossoms and the meadow with all the flowers that Mary has been collecting. Well, we have talked about contextualization and inculturation. And now we are moving into what I call the global phase, so moving beyond this contextualization paradigm. You see here a painting by Bagong from Indonesia, Jesus in shirt and boxer shorts, and the disciples also in the dress of the global youth culture. But on the other hand, you see these traditional fishing boats, as you have seen in the paintings by Darzane. And if you look at the figures, they are all portrayed as shadow puppet figures, because they have all these 3/4 profile. So it's still referring to traditional iconography, but on the other hand, it's taking up something from global culture. And what we see at the moment is that Christian art goes really global into the contemporary art scene. So you have here a picture of a happening by a Chinese artist, Su Yu-yang, and he has driven a herd of sheep into a gallery space, and then he elevated one sheep to the ceiling. No animal lives have been harmed, would be said in a Hollywood movie. So this is his enactment of the lost sheep. So you can see how this paradigm of contextualization is also changing these days, in times of globalization. Well, if it comes to contextual theology, you know my idea about these two big schools, liberation theology and inculturation and dialogue theologies, and very important is the hermeneutical circle between text and context that is constantly moving on. And of course now in times of globalization, that's why we are turning from what I would call from contextualization to localization. You cannot think anymore on the contextual without taking in consideration of the influences of globalization. But what you can see in the artworks is that there has been a lot of resistance of culture and religion against these forces of neoliberal economy who tries to have just one global consumer culture. So religions and cultures are spaces of resistance. We have talked a lot about syncretism, hybridity these days, and double religious belonging. I saw that Chung Yong is among us on Zoom, so she is for me an example of being a Buddhist and a Christian. Paul Nitter lately also claimed to be Buddhist and Christian. Seiichi Yagi is a figure that is close to the Kyoto school, so that what we heard this morning. These are all people who integrate in their own personality two faith traditions. And nowadays, of course, we are talking about a lot of multiple religious belonging, and that's the theme of our conference. The name of Catherine Cornet came already up in one of the presentations. In the Netherlands, Manuela Kalski has done some research into this. I think we have also to name fundamentalism here, because that's total rejection of any kind of interaction. And then, of course, dialogue as a dimension of religious exchange. And I personally prefer interfaith over against interreligious, because I think it's never a dialogue between systems, but it's a dialogue between people of faith. But unfortunately, for instance, in the German language, you cannot make this differentiation. Syncretism is a very contested term. You have this negative interpretation on the evangelical wing of the mission movement, an ideal of purity and unmixed, which I think has never been the case. So I go here with a neutral interpretation of history of religion that says exchange between religions takes place wherever and whenever they meet. So let's face it. And then you have a positive interpretation in contextual theologies. The earliest one is M.M. Thomas with his Christ-centered syncretism. And this image I showed from the Hindu Renaissance is the background of his whole idea. Because he experienced as an Indian, coming from the Syrian Orthodox tradition in India, that there have been Hindus who have been writing books about Christ and who have made images of Christ. Then you have the African theologian Merciamba Odoyoya, who speaks about creative syncretism. She says Christianity only will make sense in Africa if it takes from the African heritage what makes Christianity strong as an African religion. And then you have Chung Yong Kyung, who is talking about life-centered syncretism, and you can already see, if you compare Christ-centered syncretism to life-centered syncretism, her position is, of course, much more vulnerable. For me, the category that might help, and I raised this question yesterday already in the presentation of our philosopher friend, is integration. So in how far does one religious system manage to integrate elements from another religion in a way that it makes sense within its own system? I end with a few questions. I raised that actually yesterday already to Kasia. Where does religion shopping end and double multiple religious belonging begin? Then authenticity is a vague category probably, but I think we have to discuss this here. Yeah, what makes double or multiple religious belonging really authentic, and where is it just shopping around? And the same thing, that integration as a fluid category, as I introduced it in the context of syncretism, may help here as well. Well, we have this dialogue of life, dialogue of minds, dialogue of the hearts, and I think where it works best is a dialogue of life and the dialogue of hearts. Also, as we heard this morning from your presentation, the mystic dimension, it always gets complicated if we talk dogma. Then we can basically come to a point that we agree to disagree. But there are many possibilities on the ethical side, and there are many possibilities, I think, on the mystic side. So who is the artist? If it comes to contextualization, artists with another religious background become agents of Christian contextualization. When the missionaries came to Africa and Asia, they commissioned local artists who come from other religious traditions and who, by creating an image that the missionaries asked them to do, take their own iconographic language. So they become agents, as non-Christians, they become agents of contextualization themselves. Then there are artists who converted from another religion to Christianity, and they use their cultural heritage for contextualization, for contextualizing their new faith. So Newman Dasane is a typical example for that. Christian artists use iconographies of other religions to contextualize their Christian faith. And then there are artists who consider themselves non-Christian believers, but use still religious iconographies in their work, and I would claim that they also contribute to new religious iconographies, even though they are not themselves religious. And then we have been talking about identity yesterday, so religious identity reconstructions. Artists unconsciously dwell on two or more religious traditions. Artists regard their experiments with different iconographic traditions as spiritual search. So we have this idea of spirituality here. So it can be either done consciously or unconsciously. And then artists deliberately consider themselves as multiple belongers. To end this, Solomon Raj, I wrote an article about him, Renunciation of Inculturation as Aesthetic Protest, because he was consciously rejecting Hindu iconography because of the Dalit discrimination. And on the other hand, he is seeking an iconographic dialogue with Buddhism. Uttarananda, it's a dialogue of the arts, as was stated by my two predecessors already, that this you have a dialogue between the artists, you have a dialogue between the images, and you have a dialogue between the spectators and the works of art. So he's comparing Jesus and Buddha. Judas is surprisingly an identification figure from him regarding this whole reflecting on how is that possible. And he had a Christian liberation theologian as mentor. Hendato, between Kasila and fundamentalism, he reads Christianity as a Muslim convert. Spirituality for him is a dialogue bridge. And Dasane, he moves from this beautiful gospel to an art that is much more aware of the disturbances that all of a sudden occurred. Both Raj and Dasane claim it is our heritage too, because in times of fundamentalism, they have become under pressure because Hindus say, you are colonizing our iconographic works. And they say, no, we have been born here, we have been raised in this tradition, so it's also part of our culture, even though we became Christian. Thank you very much. Thank you.